Welcome to the next topic for discussion. Overall, this lecture will address the rise of industry in the United States in the years following the Civil War. There are many issues to be discussed in this lecture, but first we'll address some of the concepts. As one investigates the rise of industry in the United States, it's important to learn about several leading industrialists. Some have described these men as captains of industry, while others have criticized them with the label robber baron. Based on their actions, you can evaluate their activities for yourself. A second issue to be discussed will be the working conditions faced by laborers in the United States. Conditions were often dangerous, and pay wasn't great. We'll see how they reacted to their lot in life. Finally, you may want to think about an important overriding concept or question. By 1900, the United States had become a major industrial power. Was it worth the cost it took to become industrialized? That's for you to decide. A good place to start might be a discussion of the profiles of three important individuals who impacted American industry during this era. Let's begin with Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie's life is truly a rags-to-riches American success story. He was born in Scotland in 1835 and migrated to the United States at the age of 12. His first job after he arrived in the U.S. was for $1.20 a week. He worked as a bobbin boy in a textile mill. From there, he eventually became involved in the Pennsylvania Railroad and eventually made millions of dollars in the steel industry. Carnegie realized that the common denominator for much of the United States industrial expansion during this time period was steel. This was necessary for the construction of skyscrapers, many large factories, and arguably the nation's leading industry, railroads. Carnegie's business philosophy was simple and effective. Watch the costs, and the profits will take care of themselves. He was famous for his use of vertical integration. His goal was to control all portions of the manufacturing process, in this case of steel, from access to raw materials to the distribution of the steel. He sold out in 1901 for $500 million, and he was well known after that point for his philanthropy. It's estimated that he ended up giving away 90% of his personal fortune. John Rockefeller is another person I'd like to talk about, and he became involved in the oil industry in the late 1800s. In 1870, he formed Standard Oil. He was famous for cutting costs as well as paying attention to details. In fact, he once regulated the number of drops of solder which could be used to seal kerosene cans in order to cut costs with that production line. One thing that he was famous for was undercutting his competition by lowering prices, getting rid of any competition, and then raising the prices back to a profitable level. This image portrays Rockefeller Standard Oil as a greedy octopus ready to devour taxpayers, other businesses, and maybe even politicians. One thing that's interesting about Rockefeller is that he was never able to escape this negative image, even though he was involved in many philanthropic enterprises, just as Carnegie was at the same time. Rockefeller demonstrated his success in more than one way. He showed vertical integration by purchasing his own tanker cars so he could transport his oil to people who bought his products himself. He also represented horizontal integration by maintaining a near monopoly over the oil industry by controlling about 90% of the nation's oil refining capacity by 1879. Thomas Edison was born in Ohio in 1847 and eventually held a patent to several hundred different inventions. Among other things, he invented the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and while he didn't invent the light bulb, he did perfect its use so that it would be a reliable, long-lasting source of light for many. In 1876, he established his so-called invention factory located in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This image suggests how Edison's light bulb would have an impact worldwide after its perfection in the late 1870s. Menlo Park became a leading research facility and a model for many other corporations because Edison created several different research teams so that a variety of different projects could be pursued at the same time. Edison is important because his success came to symbolize the inventive impulse of Americans. All you needed to do was to work hard at a problem, lock yourself up in a laboratory, and American intuition and know-how would lead to a solution to help impact everybody and improve their lives. Through the actions of many, the United States became a major industrial power by 1900. However, it came at quite a cost to the nation. First of all, the environment was altered at a much higher pace. The earth itself was ripped open to mine coal, iron, and other precious metals. Many rivers and streams, and even the air, became polluted. Factory life wasn't always an improvement over life on a farm. Very often people were dehumanized as they worked in huge factories under dangerous conditions. We'll explore some of the experiences faced by laborers next. A good place to start would be an investigation of some of the general conditions facing workers in the late 19th century. Labor and management very often were in conflict with one another in the 1800s. However, contrary to the way this is shown in this political cartoon, labor and management weren't always on equal terms. There were a variety of general characteristics which faced workers in 1900 that were new compared to previous years. Under the old perspective, in many cases laborers would work in very small shops. They could take pride in their work and work at their own pace. Yes, they had to get their job done, but they could work fast for a while and then slow down a little bit and fast for a while again. Under the new perspective, they worked in very large factories, and they very often were lost in the hustle and bustle of the fast and repetitive pace of their work, which very often was set by the clock and the whistle. Today, we think of a 40-hour work week as the norm. However, it wouldn't be outside the norm to work 55 or maybe even 65 hours a week back in 1900. Workers also faced very dangerous conditions. 1889 was the first year reliable statistics were kept for the railroad industry, and in that year, over 2,000 workers died, while 20,000 were injured on the job. There was a wide range of wages for skilled versus unskilled workers in the late 1800s. A skilled worker, like a bricklayer, might earn $3 a day. An unskilled worker, just a general laborer, would earn less than half of that at $1.30 a day. The lowest wage workers were southern mill workers, earning 84 cents a day.